We are in London at the offices of Unilever, visiting with Unilever's chairman, Mr. Michael Treschow. You've overseen, in both your days previously as chairman of Ericsson and now, of course, with Unilever, several CEO successions. So what is the role of the chairman in that succession planning process?
Well, I think the chairman has to be the most active in it, but at the same time, particularly if you look at the situation in the Anglo-Saxon companies like Unilever, the nomination committee, which is a committee of the board, has a key role to make sure that you specify the job and run the process. If we take the example of Unilever, which means our nomination committee meets every time we have a board meeting, roughly 5-6 times a year. And then among its key things is surely to make sure we are on top of the succession planning. But also the full board is of course interested. So at least once a year we have a full session with the board on succession planning and talent management.
Well, let's talk a bit about once the CEO is in place. What is the chairman's role and also the board's role in making sure that that CEO has everything he or she needs to lead the company successfully?
It's individual cases, but I mean, generally you can say you need to be close to the individual in the beginning. You need to always be available when that person needs you. And then, of course, you need to make sure that you are sensitive to how things are going. But you also have to give a lot of freedom for that individual to do his or her own things.
Right.
But I mean, you need to make sure that you, a lot of support, particularly if it's a person who has not been a CEO before, trying to understand and help what does it take, because it's a big step to go from, say, number 2 to being a CEO.
How often do you meet with that CEO and talk to him? Is it every day? Is it once a week? What's the structure?
In my case, I figured out with my CEOs that having a chat every week and probably a preset meeting, whether it's needed or not, gives the opportunity for the CEO to think loud on what's on his mind or what is he doing, that there is no agenda. There's actually what's on your mind. Is there anything that stops you sleeping at night or whatever. I mean, how do you feel? But at the same time, I think you need to meet physically that often. And also sometimes we have it on video presence or video conferencing in order, because you want to make sure that you can see that person in the eyes and figuring out is it okay? Because we are normally very well trained to say it's okay.
What about in very difficult times, economic challenges, operational challenges? In those crises, how does that change the relationship between chairman and CEO, the board and CEO?
I've been through a number of those, or no, not a number, but some, and then you have to be even closer because when it's tough, we had at Ericsson, for instance, that we didn't meet our target or have to revise it, and the CEO got really hammered on that. Then you need to be close and supportive, and even more supportive, and just figuring out how are you doing, because it's tough when you get all that pressure. So don't add to the pressure, try to share the pressure.
When pressure comes from Wall Street, from shareholders, from the media, who steps to the fore in that case as the leader? Is it the chairman, or is it the CEO, or is it both?
Well, I think it depends on the issues. Normally it's the CEO who is the spokesperson for the company in all matters. But when it comes to more closely linked shareholding issues, like in the Ericsson case when we had to go out for a big rights issue, then I had to drive that. But you have to be careful because normally it creates confusion in the marketplace. Who is actually running the business? Is it that individual or that? So you have to make sure you don't undermine the CEO's authority in that sense. Right. So it is the CEO who is the prime spokesman in 90% of the cases.
We know that diversity is a big topic, particularly gender diversity in Europe. How important is it to have that diversity in the CEO, in the C-suite, and also on the board of directors?
I think overall I'm a great believer in diversity because not necessarily diversity like you say, it has to be a woman or a man or whatever, but in the end it's the diversity of minds, which means it would be very bad for the company if there were too many that thought like I do and were actually copies of me. So you need to really make sure that you have diversity by mind. In that sense, I mean, gender and nationalities play a big role because that creates, you want different individuals in the team. But of course the team needs to sort of play together. You really need different team players.
As the chairman of a large global company that operates in many, many different countries, how does the board go, how do you go about making sure the board has the right representation on it, geographical representation, experience, etc.?
I think you can start with the notion of understanding that make sure that all the questions are asked. And that is of course easy to say, but depending on your own personal interest as a board member, you have a tendency to ask certain questions, which means also, depending on your background, where you come from, you're always a little interested in that part. And it's also a good representation, which means you want to make sure, again, the diversity, that everything is represented around the table. And of course that cannot exactly happen, but you want to make sure that as much as possible is represented by nationality, by functions, by expertise, and by personality. So the more sort of a blend and the more of a great zoo you get, the better it is.
As chairman, then, how are you measuring the board's effectiveness and performance?
You can see there are again, the soft issues, which means you have a feel for that there is good fun in the boardroom. Board members feel at ease, feel that they contribute, feel also that it's the right issues on the agenda and that we stick to time. So they don't have to get nervous that they won't get out in time, etc. I mean, you have to make sure that everything around is a hygiene factor, it's taken care of. But then we once a year have a rather intensive process of board evaluation. You can say like this year here in Unilever, we, besides sort of answering a number of questionnaires, there will be an outside facilitator that will make you meet every board member probably a couple of hours. I will meet every board member a couple of hours to just discuss the performance and what can we do better. Always the question, what can we do better? So you get some sort of then feeling for how things are. It's the yearly calibration, if you want.
Well, tell me, Michael, what role should the board play in the setting of strategy?
Well, I think the board needs to make sure that there is a strategy in place. What that then means, setting the strategy, in the end, you have to accept the strategy. In the companies I've been chairman of, I think it's been important that we always discuss the strategy. I mean, on every board meeting, there is a strategic issue or strategic question that we spend time on. It can be talent review, it can be a category, it can be a market, it can be risk. But it's still with a long-term perspective, trying to drag management a little out of their boots and discuss more long-term and not operational. Because the board is not that good in discussing operational. We are much better on discussing the long-term. But I think you need to ensure that you feel comfortable that there is a good process. It's a rolling annual event besides those things I mentioned, which means we just came back a couple of weeks ago from Jakarta, Indonesia, where we had our annual strategic review. And before that, management have spent intensively time in order to actually address the strategic issues that we have. So you feel comfortable with the process, you feel comfortable with the year, and then you feel comfortable for the exam day where you actually review the whole thing in one go.
And of course, some boards are quite different from others. I mean, you ran a board with Ericsson that had union representation, and of course, the Unilever does not. What's the difference in managing these different respective boards?
I think it's actually you have a team around the table, and they can come from different places. Like you say, we had union members, which we're not used to here. In the Anglo-Saxon, many companies are used to many executive directors on the board. We are not used to that at all in the Swedish context. So I mean, it's not that big difference. You play with what you have, and you make sure, again, it comes to how do you use them, how to make sure how you bring most out of their exercise. Of course, the bigger the room and the bigger the table, it becomes less dynamic. But then it's just a leadership issue. How do you create a dynamic environment even with 20 people? Yes, it's easier with 6, but it's more a matter of doing it a little different. And the more you can create a confidence that the CEO sees the board as his best friend and supporter and helping him or her to develop the business. If you can get that atmosphere going, I think it's more productive.